There's radio.
Yeah.
Like, please, let's go.
I know, man.
Well, and then we had that Saturday storm, so that was kind of a bust also, right?
Yeah, we've had several. We've had some. I don't mind these Friday, Saturdays. I don't think the seniors appreciate it, but it is what it is.
So Ken,
hello everybody. We're just Dan.
Hi, I'm sorry. Unlike the previous meeting, I do have the record here, so you just tell me when and I can hit record. So we'll be recording and streaming. I don't know what happened in the previous meeting there. That was strange.
Okay. So let's see. Looks like we have a quorum of people. Before we start the meeting, could I ask for a volunteer to take minutes? It's gonna be like eeny, meeny, miny,
If there's no volunteers, Ken, I'll do it.
I might have to jump off, so I don't want to volunteer because I might have to jump off early.
Okay. Well, Barry volunteered. He had a good one. I don't know if you did it last time, but one of the ones I read of yours today was good. So that's what happens when you do a good job. So,
you said to everybody.
No, but right? I say it when I mean it.
No, he doesn't actually. It's all good.
We've occasionally helped in minutes. So that said, Dana, we can hit record. Ed, are we streaming? I don't know. I didn't notice if Ed responded or if he's.
He said at 7:02 we're streaming.
Okay, good. So I will call the meeting to order. And Barry, there's a template if you want in the call to meeting in the Google Calendar.
Yeah.
So I'll call the meeting to order at 7:05 p.m. And maybe until we have something to show, we can just see each other, Dan. And all right. So our first item of business is the fiscal year 22 regional transportation update. Just to give some context to why I asked this to be on the agenda. It was reported in the social media world and whatnot that the disbursements to some districts were not at the level that were anticipated for the regional transportation reimbursement for fiscal year 22. At our last meeting, it was reported that we didn't know yet what ours were. So I wanted to give Dan some space to talk about that. The governor did put out a supplemental this week, which I don't think included regional transportation fixes. So Dan, do you want to take the mic for a moment?
Sure. So good evening, folks. First, before we begin with any work here, I want to begin with an apology to the subcommittee for sending out my abbreviated packet late today. Normally you get it at least 2 days in advance. So I just want to begin tonight and say I apologize for that hiccup there. With respect to regional transportation, I did have an email exchange with Jay Sullivan. I also spoke to DOR, but they ultimately redirected me back to Jay, where he told me he wouldn't give me our numbers. We don't have our information yet. He told me that they are still chasing down a number of EORs for FY21. So our disbursement, our report went in, December 1st, thereabouts. He said, you're going to get your disbursement in June. And I said, what's my number? And he said, I don't have a number yet. He is still fine tuning the number. And I think that may be part of kind of what you had read or heard on social media. So they're still fine tuning those figures. I'll circle back with him probably in a couple more weeks to see if they have any more information on what our number is going to be. But until he said he has all that information from across the state, he can't commit to our number. And for that reason, it's probably why other districts had a disbursement that was significantly less than what they were anticipating.
So just I'll open the floor in a second, but in terms of numbers of disbursements and cash flow, I mean, I was kind of under the impression that we got this not in just one disbursement in June typically. So what is typical for disbursements of regional transportation reimbursement, and if this is atypical, how does that affect our cash flow situation?
So in the past couple of years, the disbursements there have been typically there are two disbursements. The past couple of years, the disbursements have been in either February or in March. Just given what's going on. In terms of cash flow, I did have a conversation in email exchange with Treasurer Dunbar, and he had no concerns about any cash flow issues there.
So this gives me unease. So I think that in terms of only getting one disbursement or potentially is uneasifying because it gives us uncertainty into our next year's budget. And from what I hear from what I'm hearing you say, Dan, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, I'm just telling you what I'm hearing, that maybe other districts are getting less than they expected, at least in part because DESE doesn't exactly know what's going to be available to everyone. But it makes it hard to navigate, right, in terms of how we then try and advocate with our legislators to get more. When the governor is giving away $400 million in money and isn't making it up at all to something that we were promised, it makes it challenging to push forward. Daryl, maybe your insights on this would be helpful, just in terms of like an advocacy, legislative relations question.
Yeah. So again, what we're looking at, and again, I think you kind of referenced this a little earlier with the governor's supplemental. One of the things that is currently out there right now is the reimbursement rate for this coming year is 80 to 81%, 80%, give or take. And last year was around 91, 92%. So from that vantage point, on an advocacy part, I'll be reaching out to our local legislators to ensure that they push that. I know Senator Goby and Representative Ferguson are both strong advocates for regional transportation, and they have been, supporters of our district and other regional districts for a long time. So that's beneficial for us. But again, in terms of how that kind of plays out, superintendents, myself, we can do it through school committee as well. Just again, continue to advocate on behalf of having our obligation fulfilled as much as possible. So last year we were about 90, 91%. It'd be great to be up around that percentage as well for FY23.
Can I open the floor to people who have questions about this? Kumar?
So just to make sure I understand that correctly, if we don't get our first disbursement until June and we don't have clear numbers on that, how will that impact, our upcoming budget then? I mean, in the sense that, should we now go back and revise some of what we thought we would expect? I guess it's a little unclear for me on that.
So in terms of FY22 or FY23, I'm sorry, 22?
No,
So-
for FY23.
So typically for our budget, what we use as a number in our budget is the House one, the governor's budget numbers, and this year that figure was approximately 1.8. As several members of the committee know, last year in the House number, which was released in late April, there was a bump in that number. The committee can certainly, once they vote the budget, they could always take a second vote if need be, depending upon if the numbers change. And as I think I had mentioned in one of our presentations this week, Daryl and I have been out, every night this week. The final number for 22, just to give an example, our approved budget number was approximately 1.8 million, and the final joint committee number that was passed back in June was approximately 2.4, 2.5. So that there's a variance there, approximately $600,000 thereabouts. So at this point, I recommend that we don't change our FY23 number. If there is a significant bump with that number, with the House number when it comes out in late April or thereabouts, I would recommend that we amend our number, because that will have a positive impact with the towns, and we can again go to further reduce their assessments as we did last year.
All right, Malaya.
Okay, sorry. I've been using Zoom this week, so I have to relearn everything. I'm so frustrated by this, I'll be honest. It's not our fault, but I am deeply disappointed in the state and very frustrated and concerned, because honestly, I think if you don't turn your e-order in on time, there should be some penalty for that, not holding up all the districts that do. I mean, a week maybe, but like, it's what, 2 months overdue now? This is ridiculous that we're all waiting on districts who couldn't do their job on time, which is frustrating. And I know we can't change that, but it's frustrating. Because we do need to know those numbers to know how much we're going to have left, because we're carrying some of it over. And I mean, we have some room that we've left in our budget, but it does affect our certainty, and it's frustrating. In terms of the percentage, I am very concerned about that for 2 reasons, because as we know, last year they did not vote to give us 91 to 92%. They voted to give us a certain amount that they always do that was underfunded, and then the expenses were so much less because people weren't in school half the year that it worked out to 91 to 92%. They also used numbers from last year instead of the year before. Like, the numbers were not the ridership we have in a typical year that we're going to have this year, that we had before COVID. It's an artificial number. So I don't actually, I'm concerned that they're going to use that, or someone is going to use that and say, well, last year, this is what we gave you for transportation, and no one complained and it met your needs, and it was 91 to 92%. Well, it was only that because the circumstances were so absurd last year. It was not 91 to 92% of what we actually need to cover our expenses this year or any year other than last year before COVID. And it's based on artificial numbers, because they used the October number they used last year to plan for this year. And it's going to be short no matter what. Even if they gave us 100% of last year, it wouldn't cover all of this year, because the numbers are different of ridership. So I'm just very frustrated by this whole process, honestly. And I'd hope in our narrative to the towns or anyone else, we stress that. And it's not just that we need last year's number. We need every penny they are willing to give us, because even if they gave us 100% of last year, it wouldn't cover this year's expenses, because we have more students riding the bus. Last year was not a typical year, because half the year they didn't ride the bus. And because they didn't adjust that formula, I don't know what happened to that random $40 million that was supposed to help make up for it. I haven't heard any updates on that for a while. It's all artificial numbers. So I think we need to also tell that part of the story. So I know that's not really us, but it's important to the story.
I'd like us to continue having this as an update, even if there's no update, just because it's unusual in terms of the disbursement period, and big checks not coming in make me anxious. and especially when we don't exactly know what they're going to be. Does anybody else want to talk to this right now, Barry?
Yeah, I just want to touch on something that Dr. McCall has said. Is there anything that we can do to help? You mentioned, you're advocating to local politicians. Would anything from the school committee help? Is there anything? I'm just asking just to make sure that we don't miss anything there to help advocate for the district.
Yeah, thank you, Barry. So again, as always, the school committee. I mean, I constantly communicate, talk with them on the phone, email, whatever it is, with our state legislators. But school committee could always, just pull together a letter saying that they support, the proper funding of regional transportation and send that off because again, it's coming from the entire body. I know Mars, the Regional School District Association, oftentimes, we like to send work or messages directly out from them, but I think also from independent school districts, school committees in particular, I think it's a good way to go as well.
So who would you recommend that to go to? So obviously we can send it to Kim and Ann, but it's a little bit of preaching to the choir, which we would do. But are there chairs of the Senate and House education?
So what I'll do, Ken, is we'll go through and I'll pull together the list of the people who really make the decisions. I'll pull that together, and then we can share that and help craft a letter, send it off to them. That'd be great.
Maybe for our next business finance meeting, you can craft a draft. We can look it over and then recommend to the full school committee to send it to those appropriate people.
Great idea.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, timing. I don't know what our next meeting is gonna be. Obviously, we'll talk about the end, but is that something that has to be done in the next week, or is that something that I don't know, so that's why I'm asking.
I think there's two separate questions there. This is from my take. If we're asking about fiscal year 22, it's more timely because the governor filed a supplemental, and if we want to ask the House and Senate to make up regional transportation money to that, which is kind of why I put this on the agenda for tonight, if we had information, we'd want to do that soon. If we're talking about the House and Senate budget for next year, we probably have a little bit of time because the House will come out, the Senate will come out, they'll have conference committee, and Ann will keep putting amendments in, and they really usually don't hit until the Senate, I would think. So we want to do it, but I don't think it's as timely for next year. Leah?
I was going to say on that, I actually think that we are in a unique position in that smaller regionals aren't missing this money as much, and as the biggest regional in the state, I think it is. I think urging them to do the makeup from last year would benefit us more than any other regional district in the state, and we really need to step up and do that. That's just my personal opinion, because no one else is advocating for us. The rurals are advocating for themselves. The cities are advocating for themselves. Most of the regional districts are much smaller. As the biggest regional in the state, I really think that we're the most impacted by it. And I think we need to send a letter urging them to do that. It may or may not, it probably won't help, but I think it's something that we should do as the biggest regional in the state and the most impacted by those lack of funds, those however many millions of dollars and wherever they are.
Well, we probably have that letter sitting in your computer somewhere, Daryl, from previous years. Maybe we can dust that off faster than slower.
Well, I meant in reference to last year, like the funds that are missing.
Both.
The funds that are.
I think he's saying we have both looking forward and looking backwards letters.
Yeah.
That we can start as a baseline.
Yeah. All right. So should we move on to the next item on the agenda?
So Ken, just very quickly, I apologize. I just got a note here from the WREA. They're trying to get into the meeting here. So let me see if I can do my magic here, and I'll get Tim into this meeting here. Just give me 1 second. I apologize.
This is neither here nor there, as Dan is trying to get people in, but you'd almost think the school bus companies want to advocate for the money because downstream it's beneficial to their employees to make sure the districts can afford their services. sometimes there are certain members of a legislative body that might listen to business owners more than public
I mean,
bodies.
are there lobbyist groups? Are there lobbyist groups that exist for this? At a state level, and it's a lot of money, right? When you look at the
Do you mean
holistic view,
for regional transportation reimbursement?
or any, both regional, I guess, or in general. I mean,
Mars is supposed to.
What'd you say, Malaya?
I said Mars kind of does, but
Yeah.
they don't communicate well to the rest of us. They communicate to the superintendent. They were also much stronger a couple of years ago when I started the school committee than they seem to be now.
Yeah, and I really think since they've kind of upped the ante around regional transportation, that was kind of what Mars was really focused on for the past, 10, 15 years. So like now they've just gone up a little bit. They've kind of pulled back a little. And then, as you said, we're the largest, but we definitely benefit from that. So Mars is like, they would be considered lobbyists on that level. They're probably lobbyists that work for the private companies that help support that at the state level as well, but not for regional transportation per se.
All right. I sent the link. I haven't heard back, so hopefully we'll see someone, Kim McCormick, showing up in a minute or two. But why don't we continue?
So why don't I set the framing for the next item on our agenda, or at least how I kind of see it, and people can chime in. We have a discussion of the fiscal year 23 budget development and a pair of motions. So Dan sent us today a narrative that seems similar to what we've seen before. I think that we want to discuss that, but I don't want to just be walked through hearing the same story I've heard 4 times now. I'd rather be told what's different and highlight how that's different. I think at some point we're going to talk a little bit about presentation, items that we feel we need in our pockets to advocate for the budget that we may not yet have, and get a sense of the timing for those. So I recommend that those two bookend discussions bookend the motions, that we learn from Dan a little bit about what's new in the documents that were sent today, that we discuss those, what might be there, might be missing, go through the motions where we can discuss it some more. And then at the end, I want to circle back to some documents I feel we're still kind of needing, right, to do proper advocacy at town floor for our budgets. So does that seem like a general plan? All right, so Dan, now you can put up your thing if that's okay. Again, this is a document that looks a lot like what we've seen. So focusing on changes, I think would be a good use of our time.
All righty. So the first insignificant change is the health insurance. As Darryl had mentioned at our recent school committee meeting, our provider risk strategies went to Blue Cross and Blue Shield again, and they made an adjustment, in our health insurance for next year. So we're looking next year at an increase of approximately 9%. That is the one significant change between the original number a couple of weeks ago and where we're at now. We have shared this information with the towns, and we've made them aware that at this point in time, it is highly unlikely that there's going to be any further reductions in the health insurance figure. Secondly, just to scroll down in special ed, again, in terms of the number, we made a slight increase in special ed tuitions for FY23, and again, these are fluid numbers, given what Director Smith knows at this time. And then the other change, which we made, I think I mentioned this earlier, is that we're in the midst of the FY21 audit. In the discussion with the auditors of the 21 audit, we did talk about the FEMA reimbursement. I spoke about the fact that we were looking to use approximately $112,000 as an offset for FY23, and they advised me against that. We still haven't, we being myself and the auditors, and Lansing CPAs, have not closed that chapter on that, but I did back out the $112,000 offset. They're recommending that that reimbursement should have been applied to the accounts from which the money was generated. When I submitted that application to FEMA, well over a year and a half ago, some of the items that we sought reimbursement from were from the latter part of FY20 and also FY21. So we still haven't figured out the mechanics as to how to make that work. But long story short, we backed out the offset of approximately $112,000. We also reduced, well, we haven't gotten to revenues yet, but one change that we made as well on the revenue side, is that we reduced the use of E&D from $950,000 to $850,000. So at this point in time, the number that, again, you have a motion before you this evening, the proposed expense budget for FY23 is $109,086,381. That's a kind of a 50,000-foot review, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. And again, the big change there was the health insurance number, where the increase is still an increase, it's still a significant increase. We can't make light of the fact that a 9% increase is not insignificant. It is significant. Darryl, do you want to add anything to that, or pretty much that's what's been our roadshow the past week and a half, thereabouts?
So I'm going to open the floor in a second to the questions. Once we get to the motion, let's have some general questions first. Once we get to the motion, I'm going to ask you, Dan, just so you can have it in the back of your brain about where is this document, for you to screen share your one pager, the one that has the breakdown of debt, transportation, whatever, just so that we can scroll through that, so we can compare those numbers to the numbers on the screen, just so we can, see where those all come from and how they fit into the overall budget, just as a final check, right, of the numbers we're going to say out loud. So questions for Dan or Darryl?
Sorry, I have to just start.
There, go ahead. Or are you just waving?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, I was supposed to raise my. Good.
Malaya?
I thought Barry was going to talk.
I lost the thread of whether Barry was going to talk or not. Barry,
no, I was going
to.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I'll let Barry talk first. Go ahead.
Can you hear me? Sorry, I wasn't sure if I was supposed to raise my hand, like literally, or anyways. So I had a couple questions. So on the, so that 9% increase, Dan, is that now also like effectively what the teachers would also see as their sort of net increase on their health insurance?
So that's across the board. That information will be shared, or has been shared. Actually, it has been shared with the PEC just prior to the break. I think it was on Monday, the 14th, that they had a meeting. So that information is out there. So not only the teachers, but all staff across the district.
But it's everybody. It's our it's the 100% contribution. It's not just the
right. So we have one plan, 7822, basically,
Okay.
and then that has the 9% increase.
Okay. And then on the 112 offset, so when you back that out, did that ultimately increase the appropriation for the O&M? Is that, did I follow that correctly?
Yes, it did. Yep, a little bit. Yep. Yes.
Okay, and then was that able to be applied somewhere else where like another expense went down?
No,
or is
we're
that-
not going to touch the 112.
Okay. Okay. And then in terms of, and this may be somewhere I didn't get to read the whole packet before the meeting, but how does this change the relative increases that we're asking of the towns? Is it sort of in the same range, and there's a bit of things going up, things going down? Like, what is the
Things
net
went down,
impact?
and what we can share with you is that the reception, if you will, that we have received from the towns is that it's been very favorable in terms of their proposed number, at least as of now.
Okay. So that, like, because last week we had done a preview and we had kind of laid out like a 1.8, I think, $1 million total increase to the towns, right? Spread out across all 5 towns. So you're saying
Right.
it's roughly come down a bit
Right.
off of that. Okay.
So
it's about that. And again, when we've spoken with the towns, as Dan mentioned, and I've had offline conversations with 2 town managers that we haven't met with those 2 communities yet, and they both said those numbers looked good from where we stand right now. So again, from our vantage point and from the conversations that we've had with 3 towns thus far, so we've met with Sterling, Paxton, and Princeton. For the most part, they feel they're pretty receptive to this. Princeton, again, they have the highest increase in terms of their overall percentage increase. So they're close to a 5% increase this year. But much of that is built into the MLC for them. So we talked through that with them. Gosh, that was 2 nights ago. And they understood, got it. And again, what I find is that, for the most part, they're thankful that we're trying to be in that 2.5% range that they had originally talked about with us. So I think the fact that we worked toward that number as much as we could, really benefited kind of us as we kind of go through this and go to support it. So I think if school committee supports this budget moving forward, we should not have a problem getting these passed in at least 4, if not all 5 towns.
Okay. Thank you.
Malaya?
So I have a process question, somewhat related, but Monday is the budget hearing, correct? Or are we just voting?
it's a budget hearing.
The
Yes, it
hearing,
is.
it's presentation, the public can give us feedback, and then are we voting on it Monday as well?
No.
Okay. Because one of my questions, so that makes me feel a little better. One of my questions in approving these numbers is that typically before we are asked to approve the numbers in the budget, we get to see the budget book and the more detailed line items. And that is what we ultimately vote on that informs these numbers. And we have not seen that yet this year. So that makes me hesitant to vote on the final numbers, even if I theoretically agree with them. Every other year I've been on the committee, I believe we've been able to see that in a meeting before it's presented to the full committee and before we approve these final numbers on which the committee will vote. So while I have no problem with the things we've done so far, I do have a problem with the lack of more detail and being asked to vote on the high level without seeing the more. I mean, we talk about in this subcommittee, we kind of have a sense of how things are going, but that's concerning to me. And I know there's some pieces that we can't really discuss because they're subject to negotiations and things, but there's a lot of other pieces that are not. I don't know. I don't know where that falls in the process, but it's different than I've seen in the past when we've been asked to look at the more detailed budget before voting on the final numbers.
So the budget book is done. We completed it today. It's going to be sent out with Darrow's report when that goes out tomorrow. What you're not going to see in the budget book this year, at least until probably much later in the spring, is a line item budget. And that was a decision that administration made to be respectful, if you will, of the various negotiations that are currently in place for this year. These, go ahead.
Is there, I mean, I understand that perspective regarding the negotiations, but is it strategic to not share the rest of the line item categories that aren't impacted by negotiations? Because those are all things, I mean, that's the rest of our budget. So is there a reason that we're not able to share at least the portions that are not directly impacted by negotiations?
Darryl, your thoughts on that?
No, I have no issues with that. I mean, one thing we talked about was just having a salary line. That's the salary line.
Right.
And then everything else can get broken down. Again, that's probably the easiest way to do it. And again, I have no issues with it. Dan would just have to break down salaries, as he said, later on in the year, once everything is solidified.
I'm just thinking of the transparency that we've been working hard to build up over time. And it seems like a huge step backwards to say we can't do this because of this. Well, I understand why we don't want to provide certain data. There's a lot of other data that I don't think is impacted by the negotiations, that if there's a good reason not to, I understand. But I would advocate for sharing more information, as much information as we can, so people know what we're doing with their money.
I'm more than happy to do that. That's not going to get done tomorrow or the next day. That's all I'm saying. I'm going to need a little bit of time to put that together again. We were, I can make that a priority. We can get that done next week or shortly after that. But again, when I was working on the budget book, it was always the expectation, again, speaking with Darryl, that we would not show our cards, so to speak, for lack of a better term.
And I understand that. If there is a good reason not to show the rest, I understand. It was a question that I had. So.
Since we opened that can, there was a couple of things in terms of a budget book that I was, or information that I was hoping we would see. But before I get to that, just a quick process thing, Malia. I think part of the reason that the motion was on the budget, the thing for tonight, and I'm not saying that we if we don't have enough information, we don't have to take that vote, is I don't know when we meet again, because next week is already occupied every night with other meetings. We have a full committee meeting on Monday. I know Holden is on Wednesday. I have the regional agreement next week, which we have to do, or we're not going to get it turned in time. And then there's another one the other night. So I think it's just a calendar smoosh issue in terms of that. So I think if people don't feel comfortable voting on it tonight, we can relate that to the committee and say, hey, we were generally supportive. We just didn't have enough information yet, and we got it by now. Now being a week from Monday. But I don't know if we'll have the time to meet again before it now and then. Would you say that's true, Darryl, in terms of calendar?
Yeah, so there really isn't enough time to kind of go through that. And again, I think from our vantage point, I understand where you're coming from, Malaya. What we've shared thus far, those the 40,000 foot level detail, it's basically all you're going to get is a breakdown of what's within those particular lines. We've reviewed it with this group in a pretty detailed way thus far. Dan already has the other part of the budget book completed, and a lot of it is information that you've already probably 90% of it's information that Business and Finance has already reviewed and been privy to. So the line item piece is just the straight old line item piece. It's not going to look much different than it did last year, in the sense of most of the increase in terms of our increase is going to salaries. So the other increases are broken down, and you can see those. It's pretty straightforward. Energy, we have our operations and maintenance line, and you have a big increase there. And then health insurance. So those are the two big drivers. Everything else looks pretty similar to this current year in terms of a line item. So I'm just saying that just for your own edification.
Just going back to other things I would want to see. One is, we've talked, or maybe it's just I'm just yapping about this, I don't know. But about the one pagers from Barry, Christine had shown us a one pager and we gave some input to it. I don't know if that was full committee or the subcommittee. We made some suggestions. I don't know if we saw the final version of that. And then the HVAC thing, in terms of what investments we made there, I think would be important for us to have when we advocate to our towns if we need to, in terms of, again, the question is going to be, where'd you spend all that money you got from the government? Yeah.
And I hear what you're saying, Ken.
Yeah.
And so Dan has the HVAC stuff. He's
Yeah.
cleaning that up. Chris has her stuff that I know
Right.
she's working on, and Barry had his stuff.
Right.
I can tell you from the 3 meetings with the towns and the 2 conversations that I've had, they're just like, this is fantastic. Great news. We're ready to go. Typically what happens is when I go to these town meetings, if it's a contentious budget, which 7 out of 10 times it has been over the period that I've been superintendent, there is an awful lot of conversation. There is an awful lot of angst around the budget. I think kind of words get thrown out there about what's getting spent, what's not getting spent, and so forth. But when we have a situation where their increases are nominal compared to prior years, I think these are going to be like, hey, FinCom, do you support the budget? Yes. Select Board, do you support the budget? Yes. Okay, all in favor. I almost feel as though that process is going to play out with how we've kind of met the town's needs that they've requested. Again, we can have that in our back pocket because Chris has done the work, Barry's done the work, Dan's done the work. But I don't feel as though school committee is going to have to spend a lot of time selling the budget this year in the same way, because I think you're going to have the town boards really supporting these.
I mean, we've had in the past thoughts of that, and then Board of Select Board meetings the moment before, an hour before a school committee has done malarkey, to borrow a word. So I just think, fate favors the prepared, or whatever word we're gonna use. I really mangled that one, but luck favors the prepared, I guess.
I'm sorry, and if I may, just to your point though, and Darryl probably should have kicked me last night under the table because I think I went on for 10 minutes because I did talk about investments last night. There was a question in him, and I just went boom, 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 boom. I think, I don't mean to be braggadocio, but I think we left them shock and awe. Maybe that's not the right term, but they heard loud and clear how we were using these federal stimulus dollars and made strategic investments. And I think we touched upon in our discussion on all 3 areas, technology, HVAC, and also in special education.
Emily, I'll get to you just 1 second just to finish the question I had was the other thing that I guess I had some concern about from our last school committee meeting, which I kind of thought we would go over tonight, was that when we had the presentation, right, the PowerPoint, I think that we discussed in this room a lot this idea of offsets and how to present the questions about the offsets.
Got it. It's we're going to project it, so I'll walk you through it. I'm sorry.
Okay.
We got it. We got it.
So Malaya, do you want to ask your question, or should we ask Dan to put that up and have walk us through it?
It's a super brief statement just on what Darryl said about the towns generally supporting. The towns are not the ones that vote on the budget. The citizens are, and the citizens are still fairly divided about the schools right now, at least in what I'm seeing and hearing. And a lot of the sentiment that has been kind of quiet through the winter is starting to creep back up, at least in my PMs and on the social media sites that I've seen of community members. Elections are coming and candidates are coming that are favored by one side or the other, and the divisiveness is coming out again. And so I think we put ourselves at a disadvantage if we are not proactive about telling our stories. I think we don't need to, I think we are doing ourselves a disservice if we wait for that need to come up, because then we seem defensive. I think we need to be proactive before the all of the things come out, because I'm seeing them start to come out and the divisiveness is coming back up, and it's happening in other districts around us. So I think we do need to be proactive and tell our story, and not just because we need to, because we should be telling our story, not just because we're afraid the budget's not going to pass. And also the citizens are the ones that vote on the budget, not the boards. I mean, the boards do, but ultimately it's the citizens vote at the town meetings that approves the budget or not. So I do think that we need to tell our story and be proactive. Even if the FinComs and the boards of selectmen say they generally support it, because they are a handful of the voters in each of their towns. And there have been years, including last year, where the board of selectmen did not support it, but the towns did. So it can just as easily go the other way. So I really think proactive is the way to go. That's just my opinion.
So Dan, are you able to share your screen that shows the offset from the presentation?
I am. So before I show the screen, Ken and members of the committee, we heard you loud and clear, and so in the information I'm going to share with you in a second, I looked at 4 areas. Number one, we've talked a great deal about school choice. Secondly, we've talked a great deal about circuit breaker. Thirdly, we've talked a great deal about the 240 grants, and fourthly, we've talked a great deal about school lunch. To a lesser degree, the EEC revolving, but really the heavy hitters, if you will, in terms of the offsets of those funds there. So let me put this up there, and I'm gonna keep my fingers, toes, and eyes crossed, and anything else that I've presented a document that answers your question or is reader friendly. All right, can you see it?
Yep.
Right now we see an Excel file.
This is it. Let me walk you through the numbers, and then I can make it pretty later on. But I wanted to. I think one of the concerns that I heard was, it's okay if we have something for 23, but where are we with 24 and thereafter? So let me walk you through it. Let me start with school choice. FY20. FY20 was the first year, at least in my tenure here, and probably in recent history, where the district had a carry forward amount into 21. That figure was approximately $372,046. Our receipts for FY21 were $317,430. The combined receipts for 21 and the $689,476 is a combination of a carry forward from 20, the actuals for 21 to get to the almost $690,000. Our expenses in FY20 were just over $9,000. The balance at the end of 21 was $680,420.60. Our receipts for this year in this figure here, the 237,942, is a cherry sheet number. I've got a note here, and this is based upon the cherry sheet and the payments to date. So our revenues this year, if these numbers hold, $918,362.60. Our expenditures this year, $2,700. What was that? There was a surprise from the end of 21, a bill that came in, I think it was in early September. Assuming that there aren't any other expenditures for FY21, I'm looking at a balance of $915,660. For FY23, the 237,942, again, that's a cherry sheet number. And the reason why these two columns are highlighted is that obviously they're the same number. Our receipts for FY23 for school choice, again, these numbers hold $1,153,602.87. As we've talked about in the past, for our discussions of FY23, we're looking at $300,000 in estimated expenditures to offset the cost for the insurances. So that at the end of FY23, we're looking at a fund balance of $853,602.87. Before I go any further, I'd like to take your questions. Does this format here, answer your questions about, where were we, where are we, where do we think we'll be, especially as we project out at the end of 23 and into 24, because again, that's what I've heard is that we don't want to be building a structural deficit, if not in 23, certainly in 24. So again, in a perfect world, the stars are aligned. We're looking at potentially a balance at the end of next year of just a little bit under 854,000 in school choice to start. I'd be happy to answer questions before I proceed with circuit breaker.
Yeah, I think in general, this is the sort of thing we wanted to see, at least for me. And I don't think you can really, at least for me, I don't think you can dial back on any of your columns. I think the story doesn't sort of tell itself without the columns. I think it's not self-explanatory. Like I think it has to be walked through like you just did. One question that I have, and I'll open the floor, is can you tell me why those two yellow numbers are the same? Those are cherry sheet numbers, right? So
yeah, the 23 number, Ken, is basically the House 1 budget reflects what our estimated payments will be in 22. So that number was brought forward for 23.
But we don't have estimated cherry sheet from House 1 for 23. I mean, because I think the first column is actual, right? Like what we actually received, but we would anticipate this number should go down next year, right? Because we have fewer school choice students.
Right. Again, that 237,942, this number here. Again, I just pulled that from the cherry sheet for 23. And again, I'm just assuming that as the governor prepared his budget, they just pulled this number here, which is our estimated receipts to date for 22.
Other people? Yeah, Malaya.
I was going to ask that question. So that's an interesting thing because I would also expect that second number to go down. But I think you said you're going to make it look pretty. So I will look forward to that. I think color coding might be helpful for the common eye. And I think one thing that would be helpful is if you put, I assume this would be a page just turned, sideways or something, but if this is in the budget book or some other presentation, if there was a line or a paragraph at the top or the bottom that just had the basic definitions, that would be helpful. Like not textbook definitions, but like so people understood that the CF was carried forward, and people who don't follow our meetings closely understood what is FY receipts versus FY RAV receipts. What are those specific things mean? Just not the accounting version necessarily, but a broad sense, so they have some basic understanding for people who aren't, following this, so they know what they are coming from. Like a sentence. And then the expenses obviously is kind of straightforward, the balance, but then it's just to spell out kind of what these things mean in real terms to normal people. If that makes sense, I think would be helpful. And I've seen other budget books do that with their different categories. You know, I also think I've said this before, and I don't know if it's in the budget book or not, but I've said before it would be helpful just to have a similar line for each of the accounts so people know basically what they cover. And other budget books have done that seamlessly with just an extra line in the Excel spreadsheets. I don't know if that's elsewhere in the budget book, but just so people understand what these are for, will be helpful. So that's my feedback on it. But I do think this provides the basic information and tells the story very well.
So I was clicking a little bit. I'm sorry if I didn't pause there. I was just looking at the cherry sheet. So the cherry sheet number for this year for school choice is that 237,942 number. The fiscal year 22 is not what was on the fiscal year 22 cherry sheet estimate, but is that an actual number then rather than last year's cherry sheet? Because last year's cherry sheet says through to, I lost it again. It says 317,430. So is what?
So this number here, Ken, the 22 receipts, this is year-to-date receipts, and these are my projections out for the balance of the year if the receipts for 22 hold. And this number here, that the 237,942 for FY22 is significantly less than the cherry sheet number. Our payments for the first couple of months of the fiscal year were $25K plus per month. They've been reduced considerably to about $15K per month. And again, I just projected those numbers out. So that's where I came up with the 237,942. And again, the 23 number, I think is the House one. They just took this number here and just plugged it into to 23. Again, assuming that we hit that mark, and I think that we will hit the mark for 22.
Okay. That's another potential area we want to keep our eye on in a different day's conversation. The same with the regional transportation this year. If what we were promised is slipping, that we're, you know, raising holy whatever about that as years goes on. It's kind of like an unofficial 9C cut if they're not giving us what they said they were going to give us in a time where there's billions of dollars of extra money floating around. They should at least meet what was on the cherry sheet, unless we lost students somehow. So I think this process is, to me, I think it worked. I think, as Malaya said, you know, a legend would be good when it's not accompanied by you talking. Do we want to quickly go through the other ones? I mean, I think it's the same story, but
it is, Ken. You know, I mean, we can certainly speak to circuit breaker, and maybe the 240 grant. Again, those are two pretty significant figures, fund codes. Again, FY20 circuit breaker, we carried forward a little bit over $1 million. And I started with FY20 because, again, in my time here and probably in recent history, there has been no carry forward in either school choice or in circuit breaker. Whatever we received that given year, it was used to either offset the insurances or was offset the tuitions, and boom, we were good to go. So in FY20, we brought forward a little over $1 million. Our FY21 receipts were just under 3.3 million. So the total revenues, receipts in 21 were 4.3 million. Our expenditures in 21 were 2.6 million. The balance, as we've discussed in previous meetings, was approximately $1.7 million that we brought forward into 22. For FY22, our receipts, and again, this is a confirmed figure from DESE going back to last October, a little bit under 3.9 at 3.8 and change. So our revenues for FY22, against a combination of the carry forward from 21, the estimated receipts for 22 to get us the 5.5. Our expenditures, and again, these are estimated expenditures. They're again, you know, Director Smith, you know, if there are any tuitions or any students that need to go out or any contracted services, if, you know, either general fund or to circuit breaker. Again, the other thing that I'm keeping in mind is that we maintain or that we we hit our maintenance of efforts in 22. So our estimated expenditures, 4.1 million. Our projected balance, as of now, this moment in time, is a little bit under 1.4 million, 1,367,862. For FY23, again, this is I just used the same figure for the FY22 receipts, and the reason why I did that is because as we've discussed, Director Smith is not projecting the loss of any students throughout the year. So we're assuming that our out of district placements will hold, in that the revenues will be at least 3.8. And again, depending upon what the final numbers are of the state budget, the reimbursements, it may be 75%, it may be 70, but I use that 3.8 figure for my analysis here. Our receipts for next year, again, between the carry forward and the estimated receipts are approximately 5.2 million. There's a lot of activity, still to be determined, but given the tuitions that we know, we'd be charging off 3.7 to circuit breaker, looking at a projected balance of 1.5. Again, number one, we've had discussions about bringing forward $1 million. Right now, I'm looking at almost 1.4. So there's a potential, just round figures, if you will, potential increase of $400,000 there. And again, looking at the estimated receipts for next year, looking at a balance of a little bit over $400,000 in those receipts. So if all this holds, and there's a great many balls up in the air, especially with this account, we'd be looking at a balance of 1.5, and that is most definitively a figure that we will keep our eyes on, and Director Smith and I religiously look at the tuitions each and every week for all intents and purposes.
So just looking at that line there, you have an estimated decrease of almost $500,000 in expenses next year, right? Is that from kids that are with us this year and are not going to be with the district next year?
So we also bumped up in the general fund the tuition line by a couple $100,000, and we're also looking in FY23. We jumped down to the 240 grant. One change that we're looking to make in 23 is to put the tuitions in the FY23 240 grant back at the level that they were in 21. If you recall, the past couple years we had 1.5 in tuitions within the 240 grant, and this year we had that. Director Smith made that one tweak with the grants, but looking in 23 to bump that back up to approximately 1.5 million in tuitions alone.
It looks like your estimate, I'm sorry if I'm just being dense, but it looks like the estimated expenses in 23 are less than the estimated expenses in 22 by another $400-some thousand.
Okay, in circuit breaker?
In the 240. What I heard you say, and I might have just misheard what you were trying to say, was that the circuit breaker expenses in 23 are down almost $500,000, right? And then that was my first question, and it was kind of directed towards, well, the 240 we're trying to bump back up, but the 240 is also going down over $400,000 in estimated expenses of 23 over 22. So now it's actually more like $900,000 less expenses in fiscal year 23 than there were in fiscal year 22. right? So that confuses me. Maybe I'm just missing something, or maybe the other members of the committee can reframe my question in a better way.
I'm happy to look at it, Ken,
Yeah.
and I'm happy to take 100 yards backwards and look at it from further if what I was trying to express isn't on this sheet here, I'm happy to rephrase that.
I mean, I think the process is fine. I guess I don't know if Daryl or Chris, if you have any input too. If all I'm looking at is like column I, right, in circuit breaker is 4.18. So let's say 4.2 million, right, in column I circuit breaker, and then it's 3.7 millions in column M, right? So that's a $488,000 difference. And then in IDEA in column I, fiscal year 22 is 2 million and fiscal year 23 is 1.6. So that difference is almost $1 million. So I think that's not chicken change, right? In terms of that difference. So or expensive chicken. So that's the 1,000-foot question, or the $1 million question that I guess I have in terms of that spreadsheet. Does that question make sense too?
Yeah, it does. And so just looking at the difference between expenses between the 2 years for circuit breaker and IDEA, and between the two, it's like $1 million difference.
Yeah. I don't know if Chris knows if there's like $1 million less in things she's expecting to spend next year.
No, I wish that were the case. Definitely our placements are up. I don't know if that is the total, or is there, because we put an increase in the general fund, Dan, to make sure we hit MOE.
We did. We bumped up the general fund, and I'm also looking at the estimated receipts in FY 22. You know, we brought forward from 21 $530,000. So our receipts this year for the 240 grant, the estimated receipts is 2.2 million. Where, you know, again, we're estimating expenditures at you know, about 2 million. You know, I'll be happy to look at these again.
Yeah. When you all said that you mentioned that you bumped up for MOE, I don't know if Chris or Dan, if you know this, like how much was that? I mean, it wasn't $1 million, right? Because I think we would have noticed that.
Yeah. Again, well, we were short in FY 20 in maintenance effort was almost $700,000 if I recall. I think it was 683,000 and change if I recall.
Malaya?
Well, yeah, I did have a question about that, which I was going to get to later, but I did watch the meeting where Christine talked about her one pager, and I think I emailed her afterwards because I know there was going to be a revised version of that, which might answer some of these questions. But I
have that, Malaya. It doesn't necessarily answer any of the questions because it doesn't have any figures on it.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay. That helps. It doesn't really, but it does. So I guess I was hoping it might. So I guess one of my, this is beyond this spreadsheet, but it is an interesting question about overall spending. Because when I hear you say, well, we move money into the general fund so we would meet our MOE, that means we're meeting it on paper. But what I guess I would love to know in the overall budget is between all of these sources, are we, what does our special education budget look like overall between all these sources? Are we actually spending less, or are we just moving money around to make it look like are we spending more? Are we spending less? Or are we moving money around to make it look like we're spending the same, but things like this are kind of inconsistent? I guess I want to make sure we're actually, I'm curious in the big picture. So that may be a broader discussion. I guess I was hoping the one pager might clarify some of that. but it is very confusing, and I can tell you it's very confusing to other people who take the time to look at it and say, well, you're spending less on, who don't see the big picture. So I guess I'm asking on their behalf to make sure that the big picture is that we're actually spending at least the same and maybe more, and that we're not just moving money around on paper to make it look like we are.
So Malaya, the total tuitions for FY23, this moment in time, total figure is approximately 8.4, 8.5. Those payments are then made through several funding sources. Number one, they include the general fund. Number two, they include circuit breaker. And circuit breaker is defined as the current year carry forward, as well as the subsequent year estimated receipts. And then number three, we use the 240 grant to make those payments. This year, as we had discussed probably back in the fall, the 240 grant is approximately 1.6 million. There was a nominal bump this year in terms of the appropriation, and Chris reallocated money within that grant to other areas to meet faculty, staff, and most importantly, student need. She made the adjustment in the tuitions from 1.5 to approximately $1 million. And she's going to be doing an amendment this year and tweaking that. In 23, again, when she writes her grant, she's putting back, that $400,000 to $500,000 for the tuition line in the 240 grant. One of the problems with MOE, as we talked about last summer, is that to meet MOE, you have to look at expenditures both at the state and the local level. So that's why, the areas where that helps us get there is either in the general fund and in circuit breaker. The reason why we had a carry forward last year in circuit break, in the 240 grant of approximately 483,000 in tuitions alone is because we wanted to ensure that we met MOE, and you cannot factor in expenditures in the 240 grant to meet MOE. I hope that helps at all in clarifying that, Malaya.
It does, and it's beyond the spreadsheet. The spreadsheet makes sense in its context. I just said that the reduction is definitely interesting, so I'll be curious to hear how that gets sorted out. But
oh yeah, I went way off the spreadsheet in that
pre-discussion. No, it's way past the spreadsheet, so
yep,
it's not.
It is
the spreadsheet. But the bigger question is, I appreciate that Chris said that the one pager doesn't have dollar figures, but on the other level, I mean, when I heard your last conversation, that's one of the things I was hoping to see was the dollar figures of our special education funding. So that may be a different agenda item for the future, just to get a handle on what that is and what it looks like from all the different funding sources, because we get questions about that. At least I do all the time. And it's not an easy question to answer. So it's beyond the spreadsheet, though. I think the spreadsheet conveys the questions, like the general information that we were trying to convey. So
yeah, so just to throw two things out there. One, I think this discussion we've had about MOE throughout the year, and it's kind of like my suggestion a lot of times is storytelling, right? And I think, I think when we got into the numbers, the storytelling of the MOE got bad in the sense that it started sounding like, we were trying to meet MOE by moving this fund to that fund. And that may have mechanically been true. It was just, I think we used that language so much that it made it start to sound as though we weren't doing what we could be doing for special ed. And I don't think that was the case. I'm just saying, I think the way the language was used monetarily maybe started to paint a picture that may not be the case. As I think we just want to be cautious about, using numbers to back our story and having them both there, and making sure the story is telling what we wanted to tell. A true story, right? Not fiction. but getting back to, I'm sorry to get back to my thing, Daryl. I think since the $1 million stopped at you, one way or the other, if you all can round your horses up around this, because this isn't like oh, I want information on that $5,000 thing on the line item budget, and figure out a good answer to this question. I think it would be good if you could send it back out to the subcommittee. Again, not to deliberate amongst ourselves, but just an information. I think this is a great document. There's a lot to digest here. So I think it would be good if we actually received this, the next day or so, so people can actually look at it, because it's a lot of numbers and it's just on a shared screen. But with that email that shares it with us, I think also a section of, okay, well, Mills had this question, and here's why that question was wrong, or here's why we were wrong, or whatever, because that will be in my brain until we get that. And I'm sure, Daryl, it might be in yours too. Yeah. There may be a simple answer to that question. I just haven't really heard it yet, and you may need some time to think about it. Okay. I do think the presentation of this is what we've been asking for, and I don't think there's a way to simplify it aside from the headings. I think the information has to be there, or the story doesn't make sense. And I think the fact that the information is there and it doesn't make sense now allows me to actually ask a potentially intelligent question. Again, potentially, I'll add to that. You all let me know about that the next day or so. Yeah.
All right. So I will close out. Any other questions regarding this? So I guess this was somewhat successful. Keyword somewhat. At least giving you a better picture in terms of where we're at and where we may be, and also perhaps allaying any concerns about a potential structural deficit in FY24, but that's still a long ways off.
And I personally, I think this is budget book material more than like a PowerPoint, right? So in terms of moving forward, we have some motions on the table. We don't have any motions on the table. We have some motions on the piece of paper that is virtually in front of us. So there's a motion to recommend the budget, and there's a motion to recommend the assessments. Does somebody want? I will. Okay, they're up on the screen. If we're going to make these motions, they need to actually be made with the numbers that are on the screen for just, I guess, legal purposes. So does somebody want to make the first motion, then we can discuss it? Do we want to discuss why nobody wants to make the motion? Lauren, do you have?
I'll make it. I'm fine.
Okay.
I'm fine making the motion if nobody else wants to read it. I'd like to make a motion to recommend to the full school committee to support voting for the proposed FY23 budget of $109,086,381.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
It's been made and seconded. Thanks. Tristan, the chair of a committee or subcommittee, isn't supposed to make her second motion, so I wasn't just being lazy with the numbers. So the motion on the table is to recommend the full budget, just so people know there's two things, right, that we vote on and the towns vote on. They vote on the budget number, which does not include the offsets, right? This is just the actual budget. It doesn't include revolving, any of those sort of things. And the towns vote up or down on that, right? Depending on how the towns word their warrants. And then we also vote on their assessments, which will be the next motion. Some towns, I believe, split those assessments and vote on them separately. They'll vote for MLC on one. I know Holden does that. And then Holden votes for everything else in the other one. I believe one of the towns breaks it down into all four categories: debt, transportation, whatever. At least they did at one point. Another town just does the whole thing. So towns do it differently, but this is the whole thing motion that we have coming up next. So the sum of those numbers at the bottom and the full year budget has to, and the state aid has to equal the full budget. We can reduce it, but we can't increase it. So, yeah, could you show do you have that one pager that you could show, the one that shows all the breakdowns by appropriation? I think it's nice to see. That's probably the most useful page of the budget book in my mind, is the town by town MLC versus
Yep.
this versus that.
Give me 1 second. This is not it. Let me let me just go into my gazillion files here.
I remember being in a budget roundtable like 5 or 6 years ago, and I remember the select board, one of the select boards who remained unnamed by town or person, was like, "I can't believe this school's district is having $100 million budget." Or no, next year it'll be $100 million. So that's the way what the complaint was. And what we didn't want to point out at the time was it was already over 100 million if you counted all the offsets and everything else, and that there wasn't some magical number in the sky. But just like my concern about the $1 million, the $100 million, that's a lot of money, right? I mean, we're one of the major employers in the towns, right? To the story I think we also need to tell at some point, how many folks who work for the district are employees, how many employees of the district live in the 5 towns, because of course some of that money goes back, right, to the towns, and spending it in restaurants and stores. And I'm just rambling while Dan is looking for his file.
Well, I found it. I'm just trying to get there. That's all.
Okay.
Just
But yeah, $109 million is we'll be 200 before because once you start adding percentages per year and the number gets bigger, you start to compound. Yeah. All right. So
can you all see that?
Yes. So that is the document that I was asking to see. So of course it's a lot to see just on the screen, but can you scroll to the bottom? So all right. So there we have the total for the towns, right? And the 109 million is at the bottom, third from the right, which is the sum of the local revenue and the state aid and and that. So that's 73 plus 34.5 plus 1.7, right, is the 109,086. And then I'm not saying this by any lack of trusting, but since I didn't have this in front of me until right now, right, we have Holden. One second. Holden, which is just off the screen, right? You're scrolling kind of around. Is 33,806, right? 436 plus the Paxton 7177576 plus the Princeton, which 5418 740 plus the Rutland, which is 14,086 152 plus the Sterling of 12,444 610 is a total to the towns of 72,933 514 is what I added on my thing.
72,915 514.
Part of the number in the Rutland one Ken might have, they might have gotten transposed just from when I was hearing back on it. Yeah.
Yeah, you said 8-6, not 6-8, Ken.
Okay. Well, that's why we're doing this thing, right? All right, and then so that total is there, right? So 7 to 915 by 14 is what we're asking for the towns, right? And then our we're adding on to that 34,420
867.
867.
Yep.
In that, and then plus your
750.
1750 is then the 109,086,381, right? So I just, before we were starting to vote on that number, I thought it was good to look at the screen, assuming that all those numbers are right, just to make sure that we all are on the same page about where that big number is coming from, right? Because the big number does matter, because the towns vote on the big number, right? And even if how we fund that big number is another question, right? But the big number is also something that the towns approve. So discussion on the motion on the floor, which is to approve the recommend to the full school committee to support voting for the proposed total budget.
I don't have anything else to add. I mean, outside of what we've already discussed in terms of, the last couple of meetings.
So are we comfortable to take a vote on this, Malaya? Do you have you're muted? So
Well, I was just gonna say it's a recommendation, and if there's information that comes out in the budget book or whatnot that changes it, then we can certainly vote differently. But so I'm fine with that. I just wish we had all the information we usually do. But yeah.
All right. So since we are in executive session, not executive session, so we are remote, we have to take a roll call vote on this. So Barry?
Yes.
Lauren? Your lips said yes, but
Yes.
Okay. Malaya?
Yes.
Kamara?
Yes.
And Mills, yes. So I would take a motion from a member to recommend to the full school committee to support voting the proposed town assessments for fiscal year 23 of Lynn, 33,806,436, Paxton 7,177,576, Princeton 5,418,740, Rutland 14,068,152, and Sterling $12,444,610. Is there a motion?
So moved.
It's been moved by Lauren. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Kamara. Is there any discussion of that motion on the floor? Or further discussion? Seeing none, Barry?
Yes.
Lauren?
Yes.
Malaya?
Yes.
Kamara?
Yes.
And Mills, yes. So that is that. So thank you. So our next item on our agenda, we have 2 minutes to approve. So we have minutes of the December 7th, 2021 and the February 9th, 2022 minutes. So I would take a motion to approve both of those minutes.
Can we do them separately? Because I have to abstain from one and not the other.
Sure, I would take a motion to
Sorry.
approve there was no motion on the floor. So I'll take a motion to approve the December 7th, 2021 minutes.
So moved.
So moved, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, so Malaya said it louder. I don't know who said it first. So, discussion on the minutes. These ones were taken. Let's see. Let me just open that puppy up there for a second. I read this earlier, but these were taken by Member Lorway. These are the ones that that we passed over last time, and I kind of shortened a little bit. So is there any comments on those? All right, seeing none, and you don't have to abstain unless you want to. If you think they're awesome minutes, you can vote on them even if you weren't there. So Barry?
Yes.
Kamara,
Oh, yes.
Malaya? You can abstain too.
No, I'll say yes for these. I was there
Okay.
for the other one.
Okay, Lauren?
Yes.
And Mills, yes. So then I will take a motion to approve the minutes of the February 9th, 2022 meeting.
So moved.
Moved by Lauren. Is there a second?
Second.
A second by Kamara. So these I think were, let me just open these ones up again. These I think
Actually, I took these ones.
were Barry's
I did-
minutes,
I-
so they're as awesome as tonight's will be. Is there are there any comments or questions about the minutes? All right, seeing none, Barry,
Yes.
Kamara,
Yes.
Malaya,
Abstain.
Lauren,
Yes.
and Mills, yes. All right, so good. Our next item on the agenda is new business. It's hard to stomach the thought of new business. I'm looking at my calendar the next couple of weeks, and I think we have a school committee meeting like every night next week, and every night the next week, and then 2 nights the following week. But downstream, I would think Dan had wanted to look at some policies around warrants, and I think those are warranted. With the intentional joke, I don't know if that needs to be in the minutes, but. I have to admit, I get a little uncomfortable when I get these online warrants and there's like 1,000 things in it. And then like, if I'm in class and I come back, and I'm sure everyone read them super closely, but some of their approvals come in like wickedly quickly after the email was sent. And so I just think we want to, have this report out, I think is good for transparency, and I think Dan had a good idea there, so maybe we can come back to some language around that. I know we're not going to do that before we vote on the budgets this year, but I just want to bring it up for Dan. Had mentioned it many months ago. Is there any other new business that people want
I'm not sure if this is appropriate for new business or not, but I'll just throw it out there. Just going back to the point that Malaya had made earlier. That ultimately it's going to be the townspeople that are going to vote on these budgets. So I guess maybe I'm not sure if it's new business or a process question, but like, what do we do to educate the town people outside of include this in, the warrants and what actually goes on the ballot in these committee, these meetings? Is that sort of the crux of it, or are there things that we should be doing or we desire to do? Is that a discussion that we should be having in the future?
I'll give you some history of some things we have done, if that's helpful. So at least 3 times, Daryl, I want to say it was 3 times, Daryl and I filmed it was totally community access, no offense to community access, but we went to the Holton TV channel and sat down like it was, a discussion show. And I asked him staged questions about the budget and the things that I thought were confusing, and he answered them and it played on Holden TV over and over and over again. And
it was like it was between 2 ferns, basically.
Yeah, well, there was between 2 ferns. It was, and in the era of the internet, where that can be like accessible and linked to, I think it's actually good because we sat down and thought about what are the things people are going to be confused by in this, and we tried to give pithy, short answers to it. So that was an outreach that we did when I was chair that we haven't done in the past few years, at least maybe in part because we felt like the communities were okay with our budgets and we didn't feel that way but it would be good to do that maybe every year. Other towns too are more pushy with these meetings that Daryl goes to. So I was never at the ones for Princeton's advisory committee, but Bob talked about them. Bob, Ember would go and he would, report back the grilling he got. So I think, us as school committee members going to those, I know it's not the public, but going to those things is important. But our Between Two Ferns TV show was useful. I know Lauren, the shout out to you or your organization, although it was probably you, before you were on the committee, had made some short videos, right, about explaining Chapter 70 and the MLC and those kind of things. I think, you know, relinking to those on a routine basis is a good thing for the public, for people to see. Kind of cuts through the numbers and shows. There might have even been like cartoon people or whatnot, and it was good. It was short. It was informative, right? I think that's another place where we can be informing the public using, you know, short videos like that. Those are just two things in the past that I thought were potentially helpful, and people did watch the TV show. I mean, I got people saying they watched it. I don't know.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of information out there about like how to, you know, what Chapter 70 is and stuff like that I think people can find on their own. I probably wasn't in Holden when you guys did your Between Two Ferns, although I would love to see that. But I think maybe making it more also. Yeah, I'm just like Malaya. I'm also getting a lot of people asking me like, "Hey, what's going on?" They're hearing rumors of Prop 2.5s. You know, even despite the fact that we're coming in with where we're at, and I'm just thinking, as you know, these things. What's that?
That's the Holden's probably doing an override, but that's got nothing to do with us.
No, but the messaging is, again, we need to be proactive with our messaging because they're putting out their messaging, which is if that's all people hear, then they don't hear our story. They just hear that we're raising funds and they have to do a 2.5 because we're the greedy school committee. They don't hear the story. They hear the town needing to do a 2.5 and not wanting to and saying it's all because of the schools. Okay. So we are not telling our story.
Yeah. And I guess that's what
explains more.
Yeah. And I guess like the, you know, how to read a budget book and stuff like that. I think that's great. And I'm sure that a lot of people would want to go through that training and understand that. I'm being facetious there. I think it's ultimately, what does it mean to me? Is what people would help at least get people educated. So when they do go to those town votes, you know, and they'll have that mindset. So I guess I'm throwing out there that it's probably a good idea. I'm going to go to the meeting next week. I don't know what the attendance is for these, you know, town meetings either. So I don't know if that's just, you know, typically the, you know, the select boards and the FinComs and, you know, but you know, like how well that reaches the public of people.
It doesn't.
FinComs don't. Our Holden's FinCom does not like to be on video, so they won't record or televise their meetings. So that will not be public. That's Holden FinCom's choice.
I mean, it'll be public.
Sorry, pet peeve. It won't be. It won't be online. It's recorded.
Right, but I can tell you that you know, typically, and again, I've had quite a few conversations with Paul Challenger over the years, and especially this year in particular. So I just spoke with Peter Lutz the other day just about our budget where we've come in, you know, in terms of the proposed budget, and they're in a much more positive light than they were a week and a half ago, before they were kind of processed these numbers, because they were actually kind of going down that road of, we're going to have to do a 2.5. We're going to have to do this, and we saw it, you know, we knew it was coming. And I think they were kind of preparing the general populace for that. And I think what'll happen is we'll sit down with the FinCom. Some of the select board members come, but it's pretty much just the FinCom. They're the ones who ask the questions. And I think once they go through this, they'll see our, you know, yes, it's an increase of over $800,000, but it's much less than what it typically is. So I think you know, even that in and of itself, they're going to be very happy with that.
I think in the budget book, we also have to explain the MLC versus our portion, because I know, at least in this town, that's been a very huge thing. I know a few years ago, the MLC in Holden went up over $1 million and everyone just saw the bottom line. It wasn't conveyed. I don't know if we dropped the ball or the town dropped the ball, but it was just the schools going up this much. And a lot of it was MLC, and most people in town did not understand that because they just heard the sound bites from the Board of Selectmen saying it was going up an obscene amount. And most of it was MLC, which we had no control over. So I think we need to explain that as well.
It's unfortunate the town elections aren't in September to separate them from the budget season. I think that would be healthy politically. but that's beyond my magic wand. So anyway, I do agree with you, Barry, that things like that, we need to, the FinCom meeting is pretty isolated from the wider public, but whatever we can do to be out there without being confrontational on social media, I think is good. I know that it's been brought up at school committee before, and this isn't the time for this to happen, but having some sort of social media director kind of thing, as part of someone's job to be able to put out, Martin's videos or put out short stories that kind of, I don't want to say counter because it seems like an argument, but, sort of present facts, and then people can take their opinions on those facts however they want, would be helpful. And in fairness to the towns, though, the number we showed them at that budget roundtable probably would have required a 2.5 override. The state aid came in and it doesn't. So it's not as though that came from nowhere. It's just, there's just new data.
Daryl, this coffee of comedians. Maybe we can have supper with the superintendent.
I like that.
Yeah.
So Barry, you've been thinking about that one for a while now. That was good. So,
do we have
superintendent? Yes.
The budget hearing is when the town is, well, not the towns, but the community is in theory supposed to be able to come and comment on the budget.
Yes.
They never do. So I don't know how we increase that participation or encourage them to come ask their questions there instead of all over social media. But I don't know if there's anything we can do to, I know the district's on Twitter now, so that's helpful. But I don't know if there's a message or press release or something we can put out to really promote that, as this is your opportunity as citizens to ask questions about the budget. Because usually it's 10 or 15 minutes and we're done and no one asks questions.
Well, I mean, one thing that I can reach, I forget what it is. It's like 16,000 people in my newsletter. And it goes out to everyone. And you read it or you don't read it. And it's not Twitter, but it does come out in email. But I could do something like that where I just, as you said, Malia, promote showing up this is your opportunity to ask questions about the budget or to hear about the budget. So I could do that. Actually, typically that's what I do. I can't promote the budget, but I can say this is when the budget is occurring. This is when we will be talking about it. This is your opportunity to be asking questions concerning FY23.
I think that might increase tenfold our zero number of people who will come. It's just, come to the high school at 7 o'clock and listen to us talk about numbers and tell your opinion is going to be a hard sell.
Yeah.
No matter what if we tweet it or Instagram it or Snapchat it, I think it's going to be tough. The streaming helps. I think there's people listening to the stream. I downstream it might be useful to see if there's some way people could ask questions off of a live stream, to make it more accessible. Could be a way to maybe have more input into that session, take questions off the live stream. I don't like having the comments because then people just get on there and hijack it with malarkey, but if they actually asked, questions that they meant to be read, that could be something to think about, because people aren't going to actually go, but they might do it while they're cooking dinner and have it on and then have a question.
Yeah, you can always couple it with a concert. So a student concert, then you're all set. You'll get everyone to go.
So do we have any other items of new business? All right, seeing none, then the next item on our agenda, I think, is to plan the next meeting. There's no space in our calendar for 2.5 weeks to have another meeting because we're right into the superintendent interviews and deliberations and our training for the superintendent, and we have the hearing and we have the vote and we have regional agreement stuff. So I don't really know what to say about the next meeting. It's got to be out, I don't know. when is our next school committee meeting that's like clear of all of that?
That's normal is the 21st.
The 21st of March?
That's after all the week that we're supposed to be deliberating the superintendent.
Yeah.
Is March 21st.
I mean, I guess I'm willing to do my job, but I will say that after having like 9 nights in a row of meetings, unless there's something Dan or Daryl need us for, I'm not super excited about having another meeting when we just voted on the budget. I would say if something goes greatly amiss with the budget, maybe we should have a snap emergency meeting, but otherwise I think after the 21st meeting is probably more reasonable, unless people are really begging for that 10th night in a row.
It's good.
So maybe Dan, maybe you and Randy can get together and see if there's a date that is useful where you're going to have something to ask us, and then maybe you and I can talk about an agenda a week or so out of when that meeting comes.
Yeah, we have the 21st, and then we jump to April 11th, according to what I have in my calendar.
Yeah. So somewhere between the 21st and the 11th, I think would be appropriate. Avoiding, I don't know when Easter is, but avoiding.
I have no idea.
The window around Easter, if that's in that that bucket there, Passover things, that would be another holidays I might be forgetting for other people's tradition.
17th of April.
Okay. So Dan will get to Randy and they'll get to me and we'll get an agenda.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. All right, and we'll hear from Daryl and Dan at some point about the $1 million question on that Excel sheet, and we'll get a copy of the Excel sheet, right, so we can look at it to our heart's content. So is there anything else, or should I take a motion to adjourn? All right, well, seeing none, does anyone want to take that motion? Make that motion?
Motion to adjourn.
Indeed. So it's made. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, it's been made and seconded. So Barry?
Yes.
Kamara?
Yes.
Alea?
Yes.
Lauren?
Yes.
And Mills, yes. So we are adjourned. Thank you all, and we will see you
next week and
next week
and next week.
A lot. Yeah.
We're gonna have off tomorrow, Daryl.
You know what? I'm going to call it right now. No school.
Okay. There we go. That's official then.
Yeah. So we have the breaking news. This is good.
You got it. You got it first.
All right.
Yeah.
First to
No.
know.
I mean, yeah. Funny.
All right. Have a good evening.
Night.
Bye.
Good night. Bye.
Good night. Night.